Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at the BMS for this battery bank. Now up until this point I have been using the Watchmon 4 BMS from Batrium. I will still be using a Batrium, but Batrium has evolved and changed quite a bit since my original introduction into the Watchmon 1 and thus upgrading to the Watchmon 4. There are multiple versions available right now, one of which is the new Watchmon 5. So about a week ago I ordered my Watchmon 5. It cost me around $470 shipped from Australia to the United States. It got here in 4 days, which was rather impressive. Now the nice thing about the Batrium is I'm able to use my existing expansion board and shunt with the Watchmon 5, so I did not need to purchase those new pieces of hardware. Now you may be wondering why I'm spending the money on the Watchmon 5 when I already have a Watchmon 4. And like I said, things have changed a lot since the Watchmon 4 has come out. And one of which is the amount of wiring between these batteries. So on the Watchmon 4, each battery has a dedicated longmon, which then has two wires that connect for the network, and it's got a positive and negative that go to that particular battery pack or cell. This does work great, but the problem is these wires that come with these longmons are extremely fragile. Now they have been improved significantly since the Watchmon 1. They're now using much thicker, harder wiring. The connectors are soldered on and crimped better, but the core problem still exists where they used a very tiny version of the JST connector as opposed to the standard size. And the more times you play with these wires, these connectors tend to break, the wires pull out of them. In all fairness, this system is designed to install and not touch, whereas I'm constantly tinkering with it. So that is not necessarily a fault of Batrium. Either way, using the Watchmon 5 completely eliminates the need for all this wiring in between the battery pack, and instead all the monitoring is centralized on this one main chipset where you see this large heat sink here, and then we'll run out one wire to each series connection on the battery. So when you purchase your Watchmon 5, there'll be multiple options available. You can buy just the Watchmon 5, you can buy the Watchmon 5 plus the expansion as you see here, and you can also buy an optional shunt with your Watchmon. Like I said previously, I was able to use the expansion and the shunt for my Watchmon 4, so the only component I purchased was the Watchmon 5 itself. In addition to that, you'll receive a USB cable and a Batrium screwdriver. You'll also receive a pack of fuses. These fuses are to be used with the power input connector and each individual balance lead. You'll also receive 3 temperature sensors and a test mon. So for mounting my Watchmon 5, I picked up this steel enclosure on Amazon. This is a Levington brand. It's just an electrical accessory cabinet. I believe it's typically used for alarm systems and things like that in a residential setting. So I just installed 2 pieces, giving me 2 14-inch rows. And my plan is to install the Batrium on the top of this enclosure. And this gives me plenty of room for additional expansion later, and also gives me room for accessories on the bottom such as relays, the power supply, and whatnot. Alright, so I have the enclosure mounted on the top left of the right wall, and I punched out the middle left knockout, which is where I'm going to be fishing most of the wiring harnesses through to go out to the batteries themselves. Alright, so the very first thing you'll want to do with your Batrium is update the firmware, and that is done using the USB port. So just go ahead and plug in your USB cable. So over on the laptop, we'll plug in the other end of the USB cable. And I have the connection selector set on USB, and the COM port for which I'm plugged into is COM4. So the first thing we'll want to do is click on the wizard setup, accept the disclaimer. So I'm going to be using a Watchmon Plus, Watchmon 5, but I'm only going to have 14 cells. I'm running a 14S system. And for the shunt, I'm going to leave that set to none for the time being. We'll take care of the shunt later on in the process. And the pin code is on the bottom of your Batrium if you're not sure. And once it's set up, it'll say changes to settings verified from Watchmon, and you're good to go. Now the second thing you'll want to do is make sure you're running the most recent firmware. It looks like my system is already installed with the most recent firmware, but I'll show you the process to that as well in case yours is not. So you would click under Menu and go to Tools, click on Firmware Updater, and we have the Watchmon Plus, Watchmon 5, and that will close the software and open up this screen. You'll need to verify the software is not running, make sure you have the correct COM port selected, and then you can click Upgrade. And you'll see it does some things. It's uploading the firmware. It takes a minute or two here. And it will say successful upgrade, and you can click the toolkit button to reopen the application. So with the firmware updated, we're ready to begin talking about how to connect the wiring for this. Now you'll notice on the front here it says read instructions before use, and that sticker is covering where your balance wires will connect. We also get this TestMon device that comes with your Watchmon 5, and this has the connectors in that we'll use for connecting our balance leads to the Watchmon 5. So the idea is that we need to connect each one of these pins to this TestMon. Once all 14 are connected, then we'll push the top right button, and this will tell us whether our connection passes or fails. If the connection passes, it means all your wires are connected in the correct order and the correct polarities, and then we can go ahead and transfer the connector to the Watchmon 5 itself. So for wiring up the balance leads to this Watchmon 5, I chose to go with this 20 gauge MTW hookup wire. This is UL listed, and this is the type of wiring you would typically use in electrical cabinets. It's got nice, thick, tough insulation that is not likely to be damaged at all. Alright, now these terminal blocks, you can just put this wire directly into these terminal blocks and tighten it down. But in order to get a better, more reliable, and cleaner connection, we're going to be putting one of these ferrules on each pin before it goes into this connector. You can see it chips with one in pins 0 and 15, but we need to provide the ferrules for the remaining pins. So I ordered this ferrule crimp tool on Amazon. This kit came with the tool, and it also came with this assortment of ferrules. So the white ferrules in this kit are actually rated for 22 gauge wire, but I find they fit the 20 gauge wire a little better than these gray ones do. So we'll want to take our wire strippers and strip off some insulation the length of the silver part of the ferrule, and then you can twist your wire a bit and put the ferrule over the exposed wire. And you should just be able to see the wire in the end. You don't want it sticking out, but you also want to make sure it's going the entire way through the ferrule. So next you can insert this into the crimp tool and just crimp it down. And here you can see the nice crimp on the end of this ferrule. It indented the wire 4 times, so we know we have 4 points where it's squeezing down and it's not going to pull back out. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and connect my Watchmon 5 to the DIN rail, and it slides on like so, and then you simply snap it down. There we go. Alright, so I put a little piece of double-sided tape on the bottom of my TestMon, and I'm going to mount that right below the Watchmon 5 here, just so I can get an idea of the length of cable I need, temporarily. So pin number 0 is on the far right. So I'll pull my wire in from the side, and insert it, and then tighten down the screw. Additionally, I do need some sort of insulator on the edge of this enclosure where I punched out this hole here. I'm just not sure what to use yet. This will need to run along the entire length of the shelf all the way over to the negative pack on the right. Alright, so I've got that measured out. It needs to come all the way up here to the most negative connection, so I'll cut my cable here. Alright, so when I got to the end here, you'll notice I skipped pin number 14 and I wired the last wire to pin number 15. We'll talk about that a little bit shortly, but in the meantime I'm going to go ahead and unplug all these connectors and take this wiring harness into the house, and we'll talk about fusing. Alright, so as I mentioned, I skipped pin number 14 when I made this wiring harness. And you'll see I installed a jumper between pin number 13 and pin number 14. And then the most positive wire is going to pin number 15. The reason why I did that is because the Watchmon 5 is made to support anywhere from 10 to 15S. There's a little chart on the bottom of your Watchmon 5 that will tell you which pins to connect. So this is saying for a 14 cell battery, I need to connect JC1, which is pins 13 through 14. So to accomplish that, I just used a slightly larger ferrule. I used the red ferrule because I was able to fit one wire and most of the second wire in there. So both are crimped down securely, and then I just looped it around to pin number 14 and then put a regular white ferrule on. So the next thing to discuss is fusing of the balance leads. Your Watchmon 5 kit will include, I believe it's 20 of these little fuse holders, and inside each one you'll find a ceramic 3 amp 250 volt fuse. So we're just going to take this fuse harness and cut it in half, and we're going to work with the side that does not have the spring. And then I opened up the back of the connector just enough to slide the new wire in, and then using a pair of pliers I recrimped over the new wire, and then I squeezed down the individual strands so they're flat against the terminal itself. And once that's complete, you now have a nicely soldered connection, and you can slide the fuse bushing over the end. So for the end with the spring, which is going to connect to the battery pack, I purchased these eyelet terminals. They're a 1/4 inch hole, and they're good for 18 to 22 gauge wire. I then stripped off approximately 1/2 inch of insulation, and I slid on a piece of heat shrink. So there you can see the solder connection. It's a pretty good joint. Then just slide up the piece of heat shrink, And when you're done, you'll have a pile of very nice looking leads like this. Alright, so you can see here I've gone through and removed all of the Longmon cabling. I left the original Longmons there just for now, but I also put one fuse holder on each series connection the entire way across the pack. So all of these red leads are where my Watchmon balance leads are going to connect to. So we can return the balance lead connectors back to the testmon at this point. Okay, so now I'm going through and completing these connections, making sure I do so in the correct order. So I've got the fuse holder, I put in a 3 amp fuse, and then simply screw it down. Okay, and I'll go through and finish the rest the same way. Alright, and you can see here I have all the leads connected. The wiring is kind of a mess at this point, but we will worry about cleaning it up later. So the testmon defaults to 15S. Since we're using 14S, push and hold the button until it turns to 14S. Okay, and now we can push it once, and you see it says pass. So we know our connections are good. If you happen to have some of these wires reversed or misconnected, it would say fail, and it would actually identify which wires were connected incorrectly. But now that we see pass, we know it's safe to transfer these connectors from the testmon up into the Watchmon. If you were to wire this into your Watchmon directly without using the testmon, and you were to connect the wires backwards, you risk burning out your Watchmon, and that would not be covered under warranty. Now before we can transfer these terminals up to the Watchmon 5, we need to discuss how we're going to power this device. Now you can power this with your system voltage. I don't recall off the top of my head what the maximum voltage it will accept is, but the problem with that is any multi-mon expansions you add on to the system are going to only require 12 volt power. So I purchased this Meanwhile brand step-down converter. It will take 18 to 75 volts DC in and will output 12 volts at a maximum of 5 amps. And this particular model is also fully isolated. So I'm just going to clip that into the DIN rail on the bottom left corner. And then because I do plan to expand this later, I have this terminal bar, which takes your 12 volt input and splits it between several 12 volt outputs. This will enable us to power things like fans, relays, anything else off of this single power supply. So I'm going to clip that right next to the converter. Alright, so the Meanwhile has 4 outputs here. There are 2 negative and 2 positive. So I made up 2 short jumpers out of 18 gauge wire, which is sufficient to handle 5 amps. So I got, first one's in the positive, and then I got positive over here. Alright, so off camera I got a bit more of the wiring done. You can see I have the positive and negative input for the Watchmon 5, and the positive and negative input for the expansion board connected down here to the terminal block. I have a fuse on each of the positive leads. I wire them the same way as the balance connectors. They come up to the positive part of the distribution bar, and the negatives obviously go to the negative part of the distribution bar. And one thing to keep in mind is, I didn't use any color-coded wiring or anything, so I double and triple checked every single connection to make sure I did not mix these up, because you do not want to connect these backwards and end up blowing up, a $500 piece of equipment. So, and then I have the input from my DC-DC converter running down through some temporary wiring out to the battery pack voltage. It is not connected yet. So before I turn on the power using the supply side, I want to power it from the USB port and make sure I have the Wi-Fi connected, and then we'll move the connector from the testmon onto the Watchmon 5. It is still not clear to me whether or not you can plug in the USB to a computer at the same time as having the supply power plugged in, and I don't want to risk accidentally blowing my computer up. So I'm only going to have one power input connected at any given time. To configure your Wi-Fi, click the Join Wi-Fi AP button. It will begin scanning for available access points. Once your access point is found, simply click on it to populate the SSID and insert your password and click OK. It will take a few seconds for this step to complete. Alright, and we see Wi-Fi link made and we see the IP address, so we are good to go. Click Close. We can now switch the connector type from USB to Wi-Fi. You'll see your Watchmon 5, simply double click to connect. So now we can do the fun part of removing the read instructions before use. Now, you'll want to make sure that you do not mix up these 2 connectors when you transition them from the testmon into the Watchmon 5. If you swap these 2 connectors accidentally, you will blow up your Watchmon 5, and again, that is not covered under warranty. I've seen some people recommend putting a zip tie around these 2 wires on the inner 2 connections, that way you can't mix them up. However, I'm not going to do that for this purpose. but I am going to press the test button one more time just to make sure we're still successful, and it still says pass, so we're good to go. Now it's very important to do the order of these correct as well. You want to take the connector with pin 0 first, and then the connector that starts with pin 8 second. You always want to start with the lower voltage and plug the lower voltage in first. And you want to line the pins up and push it in quickly. You don't want to like slowly push it in. So I'm lining up the right connector. I double checked this is the correct connector for the right side. And now I double checked and made sure I had the correct connector for the left side. I'll push that one in as well. And you will see some red lights begin to flash. We'll go and check the laptop and see what's going on over there. So here we can see the voltages of all 14 battery packs. And we can see packs 2, 8, 9, and 14 are currently balancing, as indicated by the red bars at the top. So I want to adjust the voltage at which these are balancing. I'm going to click Menu and go to Hardware, click the CellMon tab, click Edit. In order to change these voltages, you'll have to set the battery type to Custom, and then we can click the bypass volt, and I'm going to set that to 4.12. Click Enter, and click Save. With the Watchmon 5, there is no device sync needed. So you can go back to the chart and you can see it's no longer balancing. And you'll notice at the top my temperatures are -40 and -37 because I have not plugged in the temperature sensors yet. So now we can go ahead and plug in the supply power so we're not relying on the USB connection any longer. Once again, before I make any changes, I have double and triple checked all of my wiring to make sure the polarities are correct. So now I'm ready to go ahead and make the final connection. And we see we have a red light, so it's starting up. And I have a blue light on the converter as well, indicating that it has power. Now this is the cable that comes with the Batrium shunt, and considering my Batrium is mounted on the other side of the container from where my electrical panel is with the shunt in it, this cable is too short. So I was talking with Batrium on what we can do about this, and they had recommended using standard Ethernet cable for lengthening your shunt cable if you need to do so. So they provided this diagram to me and said this was a good basis for any serial connection, with maximum noise suppression. So once you get into that type of stuff, that kind of goes beyond my level of understanding. However, I can follow a simple wiring diagram and connect it as shown. It is unshielded, unfortunately, that is all I had, but it is higher quality cable. It is 23 gauge wire as opposed to what you normally find of 24 gauge wire. So as you can see here, I use the orange and the brown for the 5-volt positive, and I have all of the striped wires over here on the ground pin. Additionally, I have green and blue for transmit and receive. And on the opposing end, I have the same layout. I have the orange and brown for the 5-volt positive, the orange stripe and brown stripe for the negative, and the green and blue are switched, transmit and receive, on the opposing connector. You'll notice I only have 2 stripes connected over here on the ground, whereas I have all 4 stripes connected on the side that goes into the Watchmon. And it was explained to me that you only want these connected on one side of the connector. So now that we have double and triple checked the pinout of these connectors, we're ready to connect to the shunt. So now I can go ahead and plug my cable in. So to configure your shunt, you'll go to Menu, Hardware, and click the Shunt tab. Click Edit and make sure you have the type of shunt set to the shunt you purchased. I have the Shuntmon 2 500 amp. In nominal capacity, I have a 1300 amp hour battery bank. And we're not going to change anything else for the time being. And then click Save. Lastly, we'll need to tell it that our battery bank is at 100% state of charge. So click on Metrics, and then you'll want to click the Full tab. And you'll notice the state of charge changes to 100%, and then click OK. And save once more. And now we can go back to the chart screen, and you can see the voltage, amperage, and wattage reported in the top right corner. So yeah guys, I think that's where we're going to call it quits right here. As you can see, I did tidy up some of my wires with zip ties here, so I got a nice clean installation. Hey guys, so I sent this video to Batrium last night to preview before I published it, and they had offered a discount code that I can pass along to you guys for free shipping. It's good for the United States and most of Europe. So if you're interested in ordering one of these, use discount code BATTERY when you purchase your Watchmon 5. I believe it would also work for the Watchmon 7. And that offer is special from Batrium to you guys. I don't make any sort of affiliate commissions or anything like that when you purchase these. And that is a limited time offer. I don't know how long it's going to last, so check it out while you can. Now it did take me a lot of time to get this video put together, so if you don't mind hitting that like button down below, let me know you appreciated it. Any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. and stay tuned for the next video where we'll be adding a multi-mod 8 to add the second string of battery banks to this Watchmon. Thanks for watching.